So last class we talked about the Pilgrims, the Separatists, and the origins, their mission, why they wanted to create a religious colony in the New World, right? They're getting away from King James. They don't like the Netherlands. Everyone's so Dutch. They have clogs. They have windmills. They have tulips. They have waffles. And it's just too much. They want to be English, right? They want to live a traditional English country lifestyle with their religion. So they cross on the Mayflower. We talked about the journey. They're anchored off Provincetown Harbor. They signed the Mayflower Compact to combine the two factions. And now we are going to get to actually building the settlement itself. How did they survive? What did they have to resort to in order to go into the forest, go into this vast wilderness, this land unknown to them, and really have their mission of creating this godly community be a success? And I'm not sure if there are any sailors in the room. We're in the right area for it. That the area between, right, Cape Cod and, say, Martha's Vineyard out on the Cape, Nantucket, out in the islands, is called Pollock's Rip. You have crazy tides, a huge volume of water that moves and flows. So if you don't have any charts or if you don't have any way to navigate those areas, that could be a death trap for you. We're supposed to be at the mouth of the Hudson. So here we are, hundreds of miles away from where we're supposed to be. Winter has come. It's already December. We are low on food. We're low on supplies. We are barely getting by, and we need to find a place suitable for settlement. And people like Miles Standish, William Bradford, John Hopkins, they get in a small boat and they actually start scouting out the Cape coastline and look for areas of suitable settlement. And this really begs the question, what type of world are they sailing into? So if we think about Native American societies, they are in free fall, right? According to Guns, Germs, and Steel, roughly 75 to 95% of natives in the Americas die of disease. And that is going to, those numbers will also be fairly accurate for what's happening in what will become New England along the coastline. In fact, Samuel de Champlain was in the region before the outbreak of disease, and his maps have people everywhere. There's wigwams, there's villages everywhere. And by the time the Pilgrims show up on the New England coastline, they find abandoned villages. They find whole villages with, skeletons, bones, just glistening in the sun because there were absolutely tribes with no one left. So Native American society is in chaos, and they actually estimate that in the entirety of New England, that there are only 15,000 to 18,000 natives left. And you can see in this image, you have these Native Americans outside of their longhouses dying probably of smallpox or some other type of European or African or Asian disease, and that their traditional methods of healing, their medicine, their shaman, are ineffective. There's nothing they can do. Absolute devastation. You guys ever seen the opening scene of The Walking Dead, where you have Rick on horseback? I think he's like galloping slowly into Atlanta, and there's like nothing, right? There are no cars. There are no people. It's super silent. It's just clear devastation everywhere, right? And then, you have these different factions of people that have bound together that are now warring for resources, warring for control. That's kind of like what's happening with Native Americans. Many of the traditional tribes like the Wampanoag, the Nauset, the Narragansett still exist. However, now the established power structure is gone. So the Narragansett that were spared from this disease because they were largely isolated in Rhode Island, they now want to conquer. They now want tribute. They now want to rule and make money and dominate the area. Other tribes are trying to deal with that, like the Wampanoags. So the Pilgrims are sailing into really a complicated political maze that they need to navigate, as well as have to deal with war. Factions of Native Americans were already warring with each other before the Pilgrims even show up. So the Pilgrims are exploring the coastline. They're going, and this is the world that they are encountering. Keep in mind the fact that they were low on firewood, they're low on beer, they're low on supplies. The winter has come. There's no way to really restock their supplies unless someone makes a massive trip to England, but that is unlikely. They get out in a town that will become Eastham. They get on the shore and they go in and they're exploring the interior of the Cape. And in Eastham, they find what looks to be an abandoned Native American village from the Nauset tribe. And when they're there, they find in the ground seed corn, which are really important. That's what you can survive off in the winter if you put it away, and you also use it for planting come spring. And to them, they think that this area is abandoned, right? That there are no natives in sight. These natives have probably died off. We've already seen evidence of natives dying off en masse. And to them, it looks like a gift from God, right? They believe God is present in every moment and is testing them, but also blessing them. So perhaps this was a blessing from God. So they take the seed corn, these starving people, hey, my family, my children can now survive. Let's go. They were being watched by the Nauset the entire time. The Nauset end up firing at them. They exchange gunfire with these Native Americans. They run with the seed corn back into the ship, and before they even have a permanent settlement, they have already pissed off a tribe in the region that could potentially attack them. They are going to explore further and further the interior of New England until they get to, dun dun dun, the famous Plymouth Rock. Excellent, right? They actually looked at Kingston first, and then they looked at Clark's Island. And what they liked about Plymouth was that it actually had cleared fields. There was a tribe there known as the Patuxet, and the Patuxet had all died off. So, the areas had open fields so they could easily build. They didn't have to clear land. There was a massive hill that's still there today that was 165 feet above sea level. They had cannons, they had weapons, so they could easily control the harbor. And then something that made it especially sweet was Plymouth Rock, which if you look here, the ocean and this what they called a sweet bubbling brook would meet, and they could use this rock to easily get on and off their ship going to and from the Mayflower. But keep in mind, this painting is romanticized. It's not accurate because when they land, it's more like this. They began construction in late December. So December 23rd, they land at Plymouth Rock. They start scouting out the area, and they are going to start construction late December. So this is actually a time in which the first few months when my ancestors died. My ancestors crossed on the Mayflower, Edward and Ann Fuller, my 12th great-grandparents, and you guys can imagine if you are in December, malnourished, trying to build homes, you are on a ship, they would send 20 men, roughly, to build and construct homes or forts during the day. Then they would go back into the ship, into the security of there. So you're going back and forth, you're getting wet. People had pneumonia, they were starving, they had scurvy, and people started dying like flies in the first year. We get a similar starving time as to what happened in Jamestown. They have tuberculosis, pneumonia, scurvy, doing harsh labor, and half of these colonists will die. Their son survived, who was still in England at the time, who came over later after the initial settlement, which is why I'm here. I'm alive. Here's Leyden Street, 1620, where actually they began construction. The Plymouth Plantation is actually not the correct, true site of where the Plymouth Plantation was. So if you walk up Leyden Street in Plymouth, so you're by the rock, you're by the water, you walk up the hill, that hill is actually the initial site. So if you're on Leyden Street, that you are in the first street in New England where they built their first homes or their first communal houses, storehouses. You keep walking up the hill and you get to Fort Hill, where they had their first fort. They had their church there, their meeting house. And a lot of the Pilgrim Fathers are actually buried there. It's wicked, wicked fun to take the ghost tour and like walk around Plymouth, especially this time of year, and they'll show you the different sites. And supposedly a lot of Plymouth is haunted. Woo! So much fun. Yeah, the only structure that is still around from that era, that early 1620s to 1640s era, is the John Alden House. So it's right over here, right? So if we think about it, in Duxbury, right? Duxbury was the second town in New England. In Plymouth Colony, what they started to do was they would cross the bay and they would use the area of Duxbury to have summer fields. So they would come over here, they would plant, and eventually they established their own church, their own township over here, largely under the leadership of people like Miles Standish and John Alden. And John Alden's home is still, a stone's throw from this very room. So they're starting to protect themselves. They bring cannon. They bring about half a dozen cannon, 4 to 8 feet in length, that would fire iron balls as large as 3.5 inches in diameter, 1,700 yards. So that is a long way. You can control the harbor easily with that. And while they're building this fort and building the structure, they're actually having encounters with Native Americans. They don't know if these natives around them are friendly, what they're doing. That natives actually stole some tools. You'd see them in the forest. Sometimes you might see them observing what was happening with the Pilgrims on distant hills. So they believed that, we needed to defend ourselves. They're actually getting a bit paranoid because they had yet to make contact, when all of a sudden, into their settlement strolls a gentleman by the name of Samoset. Samoset was a high-ranking Native American chief from what's now Maine, an Abenaki tribe. He actually walks into Plymouth settlement and says these words: "Welcome, Englishmen." They are like on Mars, what it must feel like. We have these foreign people that have foreign custom, foreign language, and all of a sudden, this person who speaks broken English walks in and starts talking with them. What does that feel like for a pilgrim? Yes?
Like another miracle?
Like another miracle, right? Here we are. God is blessing us by providing us with Native Americans that we can understand. There were English fishermen that in areas off Maine, off Newfoundland, off Nova Scotia were engaging in cod fishing. So that sometimes they would have encounters with Native Americans, and this gentleman, Samoset, actually learned a bit of English from English fishermen. So when he comes in, he's like, "Hey, I want some beer. I want some cheese. I want some of your English goods. Let's trade. Let's be friendly. I've got some friends in the area I'm going to introduce you to, someone by the name of Massasoit or Massasoit. He's the leader of a Wampanoag, Pokanoket tribe. Maybe you guys can be friends. And I'm going to bring him over, and we can, maybe start to trade and have a mutually beneficial relationship with each other." Actually, Massasoit comes back, they have a meeting, and he brings along another gentleman that I'm sure you have heard of before, Tisquantum, that we refer to as Squanto, who spoke English as well. He had an interesting life. He was actually taken as a slave by the English, brought across the Atlantic. A Spanish priest had bought him and set him free. He lived in England, in London for a while, and he eventually made his way back to New England. But when he returned, his whole entire tribe, the Patuxet, were gone. So he was actually living as a foreigner among the Wampanoag tribe and trying to survive with them. But he spoke English very well, and he could be a translator between the English and the Native Americans. It is sad. You're taken as a slave, you survive, and then by the time you return, your whole culture, your family, everything you loved is gone. It's truly a sad story. So you can imagine that he doesn't feel like he belongs anywhere. I don't belong with the English, though I'm friendly with them. I don't belong with Massasoit's tribe, though I'm friendly with them. I'm really on my own here. The natives and the English sign a treaty of mutual alliance. So the Wampanoag Confederacy, that group of different tribes, signed a peace/protection agreement saying that they would all defend each other, that they would not injure each other. And if we think about why the Wampanoag are being friends with the Pilgrims, it was actually very controversial. The chief Massasoit faced a lot of opposition for being friendly with the Pilgrims. There were actually some people that wanted to wipe the Pilgrims out before they could get a settlement started. So Massasoit was like, you know what? These Pilgrims, they have metal. They have firearms. They have, advanced technology that we can use to our benefit. The Narragansett were going and kind of bullying and fighting wars against these Wampanoag tribes, and Massasoit needed a friend, needed someone to help protect them from the Narragansett to the south. So when he saw the Pilgrims, he said, I'm going to take a chance on these guys. It looks like they have some advanced stuff. Let's work together in order to check and balance the power of the Narragansett. So it's interesting. You have English and natives fighting against natives. So it's not necessarily just a peace agreement that we get Thanksgiving. It is a peace agreement with one particular tribe against another tribe. That shows how complex their world was. And of course, they share agricultural practices. We talked about Three Sisters farming before, where you have corns, beans, and squash, as well as putting a fish in the soil that turns this sandy, rocky soil of New England into a much more fertile type of fertilizer. Farmer Brewster, I'm sure you know all about this. I'm sure you can attest to this. I think it's awesome that your name's Brewster and that you're named after William.
Yeah, William Brewster.
So cool, so cool. Keep the traditions alive. It's so good. They're worth preserving. All right. So shared agricultural practices are going to cement our friendship with the natives. And then what really cements our friendship with the natives is something called the Namasket Raid. So Massasoit, the chief, actually was facing tribal rebellion. There were some sachems, some lower chiefs below him, that wanted to maybe wipe out the Pilgrims or replace Massasoit because he was friendly with the Pilgrims. There was a gentleman by the name of Corbitant that was working against the Pilgrims in Massasoit. And there's actually evidence that Squanto might have been plotting with them, because Corbitant supposedly captures Squanto. Miles Standish, William Bradford hear about what's going on with the Massasoit situation, that other sachems are rising up, and they preemptively go to Middleborough, what was Middleborough at the time. They raid it. They attack the natives there. They save Squanto. The sachem Corbitant ends up running off, but this had cemented friendship between the Pilgrims and Massasoit. That you have defended me from my enemies, and now here we are. You've proven your friendship. You've proven your loyalty. The Pilgrims have had bountiful harvests. They've had a lot of friends and have a lot of prosperity thanks to the Native American alliance, and this is where we get Thanksgiving. So due to the alliance, due to the prosperity, due to this new friendship with natives and Pilgrims, they have a celebration sometime in the fall for their new blessings. And it was a 3-day-long celebration. We know that they killed birds. It said that they fouled. We don't necessarily. It probably was turkey, but we can't confirm that. Massasoit and his warriors brought a lot of deer, and there were games. There was entertainment, and it was truly a joyful time in the separatist colony. Not the first Thanksgiving, though, in the New World, in the English world. There were actually earlier Thanksgiving feasts in colonial Virginia. So despite the fact that they had cemented this friendship, there was now the threat of war. So realizing that the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag were becoming friends, shortly after the Thanksgiving celebration, the Pilgrims got a message. The very aggressive Narragansett tribe in Rhode Island to the south sent arrows wrapped in snakeskin to their colony, which was a symbol of war. We are going to attack you. You are now friends with our enemy, which means you are our enemy now. The Pilgrims, Miles Standish, takes this threat seriously, and he says, you know what? Give me some powder. Give me some shot. They take the snakeskin, they fill it with gunpowder, they fill it with shot, they send it back to the Narragansett and say, come and get it. You want to fight? We'll fight. Bring it. Then after that, they construct the palisade, the fence around their fort, and we'll get into conflicts like the Pequot War and King Philip's War, where Pilgrims and Native Americans fight against other Native Americans, and it's very complex.